έχω την εξαιρετική τιμή να προσκαλέσω στο βήμα τον επόμενό μας ομιλητή, τον καθηγητή διδάκτορα Harutyun Marutyan. Δεν ξέρω αν τα λέω σωστά και θα με συγχωρήσει ο καθηγητής γι' αυτό. Είναι κοινωνικός ανθρωπολόγος, διευθυντής του Ιδρύματος του Μουσείου Ινστιτούτου της Γενοκτονίας των Αρμενίων στην Ερεβάν, επικεφαλής ερευνητής του Ινστιτούτου Αρχαιολογίας και Εθνογραφίας της Εθνικής Ακαδημίας Επιστημών της Αρμενίας και κυρίως είναι διεθνώς γνωστός για την ιδιαίτερη συμβολή του στη βιβλιογραφία, στη διεθνή βιβλιογραφία, γιατί γράφει σε περισσότερες από την μητρική του γλώσσα και αυτό μας εμπλουτίζει την επικοινωνία και την γνώση μας γύρω από ζητήματα τα οποία είναι ευρύτερα επίσης και όχι μόνο η γενοκτονία. Έχει μια μεγάλη θεματολογία στην οποία ξεχωρίζουν μελέτες που αφορούν την ταυτότητα, τη φτώχεια, τις κοινότητες Ρωμά και προφανώς τον εκτοπισμό, τις γενοκτονίες και οποιοδήποτε ζητήματα συνδέονται με αυτά τα τόσο σοβαρά και κεντρικά ζητήματα. Θα καλέσω στο βήμα λοιπόν τον καθηγητή Marutyan, που με τίτλο στο θέμα του «Το τραύμα της γενοκτονίας και οι τρόποι αντιμετώπισης του στην Αρμενία». Παρακαλώ, κύριε καθηγητά.
Thank you. Honorable Bishop, Metropolitis of Alexandroupolis, Honorable Archbishop of Armenian Community of Greece, Geram Khacherian, Honorable Mayor of nice and beautiful city of Alexandroupolis, and representatives of Greek and Armenian population of Alexandroupolis. As already noted, leader of the Armenian community of Alexandroupolis, Mr. Vartges Marutyan, today is the 104th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of the First Republic of Armenia. Please accept my congratulations on this occasion. So the title of my presentation is The Trauma of Genocide and the Ways, I am stressing on the word, the ways to overcome it in Armenia. As a consequence of massacres and genocide in the Ottoman Empire during 1894-1923, almost 2 million Armenians were murdered, and Western Armenia, Cilicia, and Armenian-populated regions of Ottoman Empire was cleared of Armenians, where they lived for millennia. Along with heavy losses of human life and territory, Armenians suffered the loss of invaluable cultural assets, such as monasteries, churches, schools, khachkars, manuscripts, etc. The newly created Armenian state was to occupy only 1/10 of its historical homeland. The remnants of Armenians were scattered all over the world, creating the Armenian diaspora. The tragedy they lived through left a lasting imprint on the psychology of Armenians and resulted in the forming of a new powerful layer of collective and historical memory, one with a deep emotional quality and long-lasting effect. So this is the map of the Armenian genocide between 1915 to 1923. There is a famous saying, time heals all wounds. The healing function of time extends also to the traumas. The question is, what do these traumas look like? How does the treatment process go? How long does it take for the traumas to heal? What hinders their treatment? What hinders their treatment? How to overcome those obstacles? There are many questions, and the answers are ambiguous. It is one thing when you are dealing with a specific individual. It is quite another when you are talking about a community that has been living divided in many countries of the world for 100 years. And that is why it is probably convenient to monitor the issue separately for the Armenian diaspora and the First, Second, and Third Republics of Armenia. I consider it expedient to put the commemorations of the Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day in the diaspora and Armenia at the center of the discussion of the issue. Why? The 24th of April is not merely a Remembrance Day of the victims of the Armenian Genocide. It is one of the most important and unique elements of the Armenian identity that unifies all Armenians throughout invisible links. I believe that the remembrance of the victims, reminiscence of the genocide during one day's event, embody and reflect the current state of the society. It is the summary of the realia, concepts, policy, and propaganda at the given moment. Concurrently, the commemoration of the genocide victims is not limited to or conditional on the fact of only one day's observation or non-observation. In various forms, the memory of the Metz Yegern has been latently present in the survivors and their descendants, in the souls of those who know about the genocide. It is reflected in their speech, conversations, behavior, stance, actions during their whole life. Discussing the significance of the Remembrance Day means to analyze the entire spectrum of manifestations of the genocide memories, considering the volume of the subject and presentation only with certain emphases. Well, I used here the term Metz Yegern. For not Armenians, I just want to explain what does that mean. It means great crime. The Armenian term for designation, genocide. The Armenian word Yegern, connoting such meanings as evil, peril, crime, disaster, accident, calamity, and loss, has long been used in Armenian medieval literature, while the term Metz refers to the great scale of this calamity. After the events of 1915 and before the term genocide gained wide circulation in the mid-1960s, the term Metz Yegern was used to describe the large-scale massacres carried out by the Turks and the Kurds in the Ottoman Empire. Today, the terms Metz Yegern and genocide are still synonymous to the Armenian people and have almost identical usage. So just a year ago, a very interesting book was published on this issue, Vartan Matosyan, The Politics of Naming of the Armenian Genocide, Language, History, and Metz Yegern. The first forms of genocide commemoration after the First World War in Armenian communities, both those which were centuries old and those newly established among the diaspora, focused on ceremonies of mourning. The first mourning ceremony commemoration took place at the Damascus Cathedral. At the Damascus Cathedral on October 28, 1918. I am quoting, "For the souls of innocent victims." And a holy mass was served. On January 20, 1919, the national authorities in Aleppo organized another mourning ceremony, I am quoting, "For all innocent victims," end of quote, with the participation of dozens of thousands Armenian expatriates from the city and vicinities. On May 25, 1919, a mourning ceremony was held in another Armenian populated city in the Middle East, in Baghdad, in the hall of the Tarkmanchats, or Translators College. It was dedicated not only to the memory of victims of the genocide, but also to the memory of the soldiers who died on the battlefields during the war. After 2 months of organizational work, in April 25, April 11, according to the old style, of 1919, a mourning ceremony was organized in Constantinople. The mourning ceremonies were organized, first of all, for remembering the genocide victims in the form of mourning, when people simply cried, as, I am quoting, "each survivor had too many losses and could not stop the drops of tears flowing from their eyes like a stream, end of quote. It is a quote from Mihran Najarian's memoirs of 1918-1948. However, during such ceremonies, the people bemoaned their dearest not in private, but collectively mourned the loss of hundreds of thousands. Psychologically, collective mourning ceremonies to some extent relieved the feeling of loss. Along with it, they emphasized the necessity of supporting the orphans, widows generally, those occurring in need as a direct consequence of the genocide by means of creative work and not weeping. Thus, the mourning ceremony played the role of a specific factor of ethnic consolidation that demonstrated the unity of Armenians, even if it was just mourning. Unity was also demonstrated through the termination of work at Armenian schools, institutions, and closing of shops on the Remembrance Day. There were certain commonalities in the structure of the mourning ceremonies. The main actors were the clergy, service for dead at the church, sometimes a procession to cemetery, classic and Armenian spiritual music and chants. As a rule, invited were also the representatives of other Christian churches, thus stressing the Christian origin of the victims as one of the reasons of mass slaughter. The next part of these ceremonies consisted of reciting the works of victimized writers, speeches of representatives of various organizations, parties, or intellectuals, which inspired the audience with confidence and trust in the future of Armenians. As a rule, all the speakers first explained why it is necessary to remember, in particular to remember the martyrs together. The audience was presented with the ideology that there is a connection between the victims and the fact of the existence of the newly created Republic of Armenia, at the cost of their lives. In addition to condemning the perpetrators of the genocide, it was mentioned that revenge should be the strengthening of Armenia and the manifestation of the victory of the Armenians, the will of the people to survive, the fact of survival itself. Regardless of the party affiliation of the speakers, the goal was to continue the pursuit of the Armenian cause, that is, the return of the lands of Western Armenia to the Armenian people. The fact that the Armenians were fighters was sometimes manifested in the morning marches with the emphasized participation of the Armenian military, the heroes of self-defense battles. In other words, the annual celebrations of April 24 in the diaspora helped both to preserve the traumatic memory of the Armenian genocide and at the same time contain calls and initiatives to overcome it. Invited to mourning ceremonies were, as a rule, the representatives of foreign churches, high-rank foreign servicemen, members of the diplomatic missions. It was a modest attempt to make the narrow, merely community event of remembrance of the genocide victims publicly known and to make the citizens of the countries of their residence acknowledge that reality. A while later, after 1965, when the issue of the international recognition and condemnation of the Metz-Yeghern turned to a political fact, such participation was given much more importance. If the role of the writer Yervant Otyan was great in the initiation of the mourning and commemoration ceremonies in Constantinople, then in 1918 the role of writer Vertanes Papazian was decisive in celebrating the Day of Remembrance of the victims of the Metz-Yeghern in the First Republic of Armenia, which was established in May 1918. On March 25, 1920, Vertanes Papazian applied to the Catholicos of all Armenians, Georg V Surenyans, to the Parliament of the Republic of Armenia and to the Minister of Public Education and Arts to declare April 11th or 24th by new calendar the National Mourning Day dedicated to the memory of hundreds of Armenian intellectual martyrs who fell from the ruthless Turkish sword in the days of the Great World War. See, nothing about all victims, just about the Armenian intellectuals. In a letter addressed to the Armenian parliament, Papazian also suggested that during the day of mourning, shops and businesses should be encouraged to close, and schools and universities to organize commemorative ceremonies. This, Papazian added, would have the important role of providing a way that, I am quoting, the young generation would hear and learn at the cost of what sacrifices it is enjoying today's freedom, and who were the victims that crowned our independence with their crimson blood, end of quote. The Synodal Epistle of March 26, 1920, following the above application, instructed, I'm quoting, to serve a solemn office for dead in the memory of 760 intellectuals and clerics victimized on April 11, 1915 in Constantinople, and all Armenian provinces of the Day of Remembrance of the Dead after the Easter, Monday 30th of March, or April 12th. The office for the dead in the memory of the genocide victims was served at Holy Echmiadzin by the Catholicos of all Armenians, Georg Surenyans, in the presence of the representatives of Armenian Catholic and the Evangelical communities. Then the Catholicos proclaimed April 11 or 24th the National Day of Remembrance of the victims of the First World War. A year and a half later, on October 30, 1921, conceding to the request of the Constantinople Patriarch of September 24, 1921, Georg V issued a patriarchal letter or conduct establishing in perpetuity the remembrance of hundreds of thousands Armenian victims, I'm quoting, by establishing a special day, namely the 11th, 24th day of month April, which should be called, I'm quoting, national holiday, in the remembrance of hundreds of thousands Armenian victims of the World War, end of quote. On that day, all churches in Armenia should serve a solemn liturgy and office for dead. From then on, this Remembrance Day was included into the annual calendars of Holy See of Saint Echmiadzin to remember forever in future. Well, just for your knowledge, our Greek friends, Mother See of Holy Echmiadzin is the governing body of the Armenian Apostolic Church. It is headquartered around Echmiadzin Cathedral in Vaghar-Shapat, Echmiadzin, Armenia, and is the seat of the Catholicos of all Armenians, the head of the church. The Soviet power was established in Armenia in December 2, 1920, as a result of active interference of the 11th Red Army, following the Armenian-Turkish War that began in September of 1920. The genocide itself was excised from public discussion with the bells of Echmiadzin, which had rung to commemorate the memory of the genocide victims every April 24 since independence, fell silent under Soviet rule. By decision of the Armenian Central Committee of the Communist Bolshevik Party, dated August 31, 1926, Mr. Aramaiz Yerzhenkian, who was in charge for relations with the church, was commissioned to, I'm quoting, negotiate with the Catholicosat on the necessity of cancelling the commemoration of the Remembrance Day of the World War victims, April 24, end of quote. After 1926 notification of April 24 was removed until 1964 from the church calendars published by Echmiadzin. Meanwhile, the world was generally silent on the assessment of the historical fact of the Armenian genocide. So much, as already was noted by Dr. Professor Hoffman, so much so that on the eve of the outbreak of the World War II, the arsonist of the war, Adolf Hitler, declared, "Who now remembers the annihilation of the Armenians?" According to part of researches in the field of memory theory, especially well-known French historian Pierre Nora, it is the present which creates the instruments of commemoration, seeks out dates and figures to commemorate, ignores some and invents others, and sometimes artificially manipulates dates. The principle that, I am quoting, history proposes but the present disposes, end of quote, operates, and the significance of commemorations in the formation of identity is emphasized. Another famous researcher, Boris Schwartz, in one of his works assumes as a basis the principle that, I'm quoting, while the object of commemoration is usually to be found in the past, the issue which motivates its selection and shaping is always to be found among the concerns of the present, end of quote. According to prominent sociologist Emil Durkheim, conceptions of the past are cultivated by periodic commemoration rites, whose function is not to transform the past by bending it to serve the present, but to reproduce the past, to make it live as it once did. On this basis, by what interpretation the issues of history and memory are presented to the audience is absolutely essential. Indeed, knowing to do with historical knowledge may figure as significantly as historical knowledge itself among the means to that power and authority. It is here that one of the most significant features of historical and collective memory, its huge ethno-mobilizing potential, comes to the forefront. Ethnic mobilization occurs in the life of a society due to the operation of inner mechanisms functioning within that society, and is also guided by the state propagandizing machinery. In the latter instance, the items simply change places. The political elite tries to develop a national identity and political and collective memory that would assist the ethnic mobilization of the society around certain political issues, put forward but that very elite, which eventually results in the control over the political life of that society by the state elite. In this case, the contrasting of we, they, we, others is used as a tool, and one of the mechanisms for this type of tactic is the already existing or newly shaped commemorations. How so? One of the components of the self-awareness of unification on any basis, territorial, ethnic, national, and such like, is the image of the stranger, the alien, with whom the image of ours is compared and contrasted. The image of the alien may have negative, neutral, as well as positive characteristics, but under certain circumstances, especially in a conflict situation, can give rise to the image of an enemy. Research has revealed just how strongly the enemy image might affect the processes of formation of national self-awareness. Conflict combined with the enemy image, real or imaginary, become an incentive for a nation's mobilization. It is impossible to understand the process of ethnic mobilization that is the mobilization of an ethnic community around certain political issues, without an appreciation of the role of historical and collective memory. This circumstance is to be taken into consideration in order to explain why in ethnopolitical confrontations memory acquires a predominant significance. Historical and collective memory becomes the foundation on which the perception of a conflict is erected. The justice of one's own cause and the groundlessness of the claims of the opposite party are interpreted. Historical and collective memory therefore becomes the grounds upon which a nation's forces can be united and advanced as the solution of certain problems. During Stalin epoch, mid-1920s, mid-1950s, talk of the genocide gradually died down and discussion of Turkish-Armenian antagonism was not encouraged. Hints about the problem were described as manifestations of nationalism, which were punished with imprisonment, exile, or execution. The decade of Khrushchev thaw, mid-1950s to mid-1960s, was accompanied by changes within the wide circles of the society, manifestations of a certain freedom of thought on the subject of genocide due to literature, but also in the political will of the Armenian authorities. At the end of December 1916, Mr. Yakov Zarobyan, who resided in Russia until 1949, was elected the first secretary of the Central Committee of Armenian Communist Party. Being himself a refugee from Ardavan, in 1914 he took the road to Rostov-on-Don on foot and had the first-hand knowledge of the Metz-Yagern based on his own experience and on the fate of his parents. Here is he, Mr. Zarobyan. One of his first steps in office was preparing to raise the question of the necessity to respect the memory of the genocide victims at the Central Committee of Communist Party of the Soviet Union and developing an according program. By commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, Zarobyan first of all planned to satisfy the yearning of the Armenian people for the remembrance of the victims. In order to gain the approval of the higher authority, the Communist Party of the USSR, for the arrangements of events in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of mass killings of Armenians in 1915. See, he haven't used the term Yagern, he haven't used the term Turks. The Soviet Armenian Communist Party leadership took advantage of the factor of the Armenian diaspora, thus moving the issue to an ideological level. In particular, the letter of December 1964 of Yakov Zarobyan to the Communist Party leadership stated that, I'm quoting, the reactionary forces of the Armenian diaspora, I suppose having in mind the Harutyun party, end of quote, declared that, I'm quoting, Soviet Armenia does nothing to commemorate the anniversaries of mass killings of Armenians, end of quote. Instead, insist that, I'm quoting, our country neglects the memory of hundreds of thousands of our compatriots, thus actually exonerating the policy of genocide, end of quote. Zarobyan concluded, beginning of quote, we think it appropriate to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the date in the light of the absolute victory of the Communist Party of Soviet Union Leninist national policy, to signify the great achievements of the reborn Armenian people in the spheres of economy, culture, and science, end of quote. He suggested that the arrangements should be carried out in a way as to have no negative effect on the policy of the USSR of improvement of mutual relationships relations with neighboring countries, and with Turkey in particular. It should pursue an objective that a similar tragedy is never to be allowed in the history of any people. Something like never again. So this last phrase, a similar tragedy is never to be allowed in the history of any people, in particular was widely used in Soviet Armenian circles and was often used when depicting the Great Patriotic War. Another important ideological clause included in the above said letter was the following. I'm quoting, to erect in Yerevan a monument to the Armenian martyrs fallen in World War I. The monument is to symbolize the revival of the Armenian people. The term World War I used in the letter was chosen to not solely indicate the time, but also to move the incident to the world level. Another characteristic feature is that there was no mention of any kind of those who had been responsible for making Armenians fallen martyrs. It was sufficient that it happened in the years of World War I. Zarobyan's guidelines were an example of a specific political strategy. When looking forward to a positive solution, the issue of the Armenian genocide was being presented to the less informed, in this case Communist Party, higher authorities in a language understandable and acceptable for them, in this case in the language of Soviet ideology, thus removing the issue from the sphere of ethnic confrontation. The commemoration of April 24, 1965 may be divided into two parts. The first part consisted of an observation of the state and party level that took place at Yerevan Theatre of Opera and Ballet in the form of a meeting of the representatives of the Yerevan public circles dedicated to the remembrance of the victims of 1915 and the Yeren. With the participation of the party leadership, government of the Armenian SSR, Catholicos Vazgen I. The main emphasis of speeches made there was that the Armenian people are for the first time observing the anniversary of the Metz Yeren and respecting the bright memory of thousands of innocent victims with dignity. Condemned should be the genocidal policy of its perpetrators and not the Turkish working class. Only the victory of the Soviet power in Armenia, the fraternal assistance of the great Russian people, saved the Armenians from total extermination. And the anniversary of genocide is commemorated not by moans and lament, but in conditions of Armenia's resurrection, with the conviction that no force except the Soviet social order would bring such a bright future to Armenian people. At 10 a.m. of April 24, 1965, tens of thousands of young people, mostly in black, with slogans reading 2 million, referring the number of victims, return the lands, justly resolve the Armenian cause, among others, and with the large portraits of Komitas and Daniel Varujan, Komitas' famous Armenian composer, Daniel Varujan, well-known Western Armenian writer, in hands gathered at the central square of Yerevan, named after Lenin, chanting, the lands, Hogere. Leaflets disseminated in the crowd were addressed to the Central Committee of Communist Party of Armenia, Armenian government, and the parliament. They requested the Soviet leadership to abolish injustice in national agenda resulting from the cult of Stalin and give fair solution to the demands of Armenian people, specifically to return Karabakh and Nakhichevan and other lands historically inhabited by Armenians to Armenia, to settle the Armenian repatriates in Nakhichevan because the density of population in Armenia has reached the critical mark, to release 7 Armenian patriots, and to accelerate the repatriation of Armenians. Demands were delivered to the Armenian leadership on the same day in the Lenin Square. Other leaflets read, appeal to Armenian people. Armenians, remember the 24th of April is the day of Armenian genocide. Everyone to mourning procession, as well as down with the Turkish rule in Western Armenia, or return our Western Armenian lands. Freedom to Western Armenians. The Lenin Square demonstrators moved with patriotic slogans to the streets of Yerevan. Then the procession moved to the Komitas Pantheon to respect the memory of the great composer. After several speeches, the procession went to the Opera Square where the official meeting began. The Komitas Pantheon, just want for our Greek friends, formed in 1936, is the cemetery where many outstanding figures of Armenia's artistic world, as well as politicians and public persons, are buried, including Komitas, after whom it was named. So here are the pictures of April 24, 1965. It's a crowd in the Lenin Square. And also in Lenin Square, appealing to the government of Armenia, which is on the tribunes, nearby Opera House. And these are the leaflets. A little later, a group of youth tried to enter the hall, but meeting the resistance of the security, they started throwing stones on the opera building and broke the windows. The guards switched water pumps, but in vain. About 200 demonstrators intruded into the building and then into the hall, shouting, "The lands are ours, ours." The solemn session failed and the Republic's leadership fled. Only the Catholicos remained calling for peace. Tens of people were arrested that day, but no criminal proceedings were started. They were released as their actions were qualified as hooliganism. In the afternoon of April 25, the opera building was already cleaned. New window glasses were installed, and the commission that arrived from Moscow saw no traces of the event. Nevertheless, months later, Yakov Zarubyan was fired from the office of the first secretary of the Communist Party of Armenia. So this is the building of National Opera and Ballet. Commemorations of April 24, 1965 in Yerevan broke the wall of official silence and revealed the truth about one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century to wide public. It gave rise to scholarly researches, publication of books and archive records relating to the events of 1915 and inclusion of the history of 1915 genocide into the textbooks. Finally, it was the unique case when the authorities and people were struggling, even from opposite ends, for the same cause. They struggled and reached their goal. On February 15, 1965, the Presidium of the Communist Party of Central Committee of Communist Party of Armenia made a decision to erect a monument in the remembrance of the genocide victims. Terms and conditions of the bidding process emphasized that, I am quoting, "The monument shall embody the revival of the Armenian people its present and bright future, end of quote. The place intended for the monument in Tsitsernakaberd Park was directed to Western Armenia, to Mount Ararat, one of the symbols of Armenians. The project design architects Artur Tarkhanyan and Sashur Kalasyan, by the way, Sashur Kalasyan just celebrated his 86th anniversary of birthday. So the project design selected by the jury in June 1965 had, I'm quoting the opinion of Varazdat Harutyun, famous Armenian architect, simple and understandable solutions, bent steles resembling cross stones, khachkars, that symbolized the mourning for victims, and a high obelisk nearby symbolizing the resurrection. The memorial complex on Tsitsernakaberd hill was built in record terms, 2.5 years. The memorial was solemnly opened on November 29, 1967, in the presence of thousands of people and the entire leadership of the Communist Party of Armenia and government. It was broadcasted on radio and TV to the entire republic. Here are just some pictures of the building process of the monument. Official ceremony of opening. As I told, the monument itself is directed to Mount Ararat. The complex itself occupies an area about 0.5 hectare and consists of 3 main structures: a memorial wall, Temple of Eternity or Memorial Hall, and the obelisk resurrecting Armenia. Inscribed on a 110 meters long memorial wall are the names of Armenian settlements massacred in the Ottoman Empire. A circular hall 30 meters in diameter, built of 12 huge basalt pylons, bent towards the eternal fire in the center, symbolize the perpetual memory of the genocide victims, and the 40-meter high obelisk is the stone embodiment of the sprout, consisting of 2 leaves that continue each other and symbolize the revival of Armenian people. I just want to show more pictures. So this is the memorial wall with the names of the settlements. See, here is written Mush, Zeytun, Sis, Adana, Marash, Hacan, and people are putting flowers down to Adana, for example, in this case. Mush, Khizan, and here is poster, Suka Haverje, sorrow is forever if there is no struggle, and you see flowers under the mush, lady with a flower under the inscribed name of the city of Diyarbakir. Youngsters at the monument, flowers nearby the eternal fire. And this is the obelisk, which looks like a sprout, consisted from 2 leaves. The impression left by this structure on the visitors is reached by outwardly restrained volumetric spatial solution of the memorial, lack of any decoration, and spiritual music permanently heard there. It is a unique sample of combination of the architecture and music in the world art, showing the unlimited possibilities of stone to create a perfect structure by laconic, strict, and impressive means. In 1995, the Museum of Genocide was added to the complex area. See, on the left. This is the entrance to the museum. These are just some pictures from the interior of the museum. The last design was done in 2015 on the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. The 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide is also celebrated with great solemnity by the Armenian Church. On April 24, 1965, Catholicos Vazgen I served the liturgy and office for dead in the presence of thousands of pilgrims who had come to the Holy See for the 50th anniversary of the collective martyrdom of the Armenian people. Vazgen I then blessed the cornerstone of the memorial to the victims of genocide to the north of the Holy See, which was completed, this structure, in October 1965. The inscription on the stone pedestal of the monument read, "A monument of prayer and promise to the memory of the Armenian victims of the April Yeghern of 1915. Inscribed on the reverse of the monument were the names of Armenian cities and settlements that accepted the self-defense battles: Van, Musaler, Shapin, Garahisar, Hajan, Marash, Yedesia or Urfa, Zeytun, Sasun, and Sardarabad. In the latter, the Turkish army in 1918 was defeated and retreated. General commemoration of April 24 in all communities of diaspora is dictated by the important fact that diaspora is the product of genocide. It has already been mentioned that the Armenian genocide led to the physical annihilation of the vast majority of Armenians. Thousands of families and clans were wiped out. There were not many survivors, but there were. And many of the survivors of the formed Armenian diaspora, while creating new families, tried to revive their parents, sisters and brothers who fell victim to the Ottoman slaughter, naming their children and their relatives. The large families created by the survivors saved thousands of family names from the loss of oblivion to some extent. The survivors, with their newly created families, in fact, carried out a unique nation birth, rediscovered the new universe of Western Armenians. And in that way, they seemed to take on the functions of a creator, a demiurge. The Day of Remembrance of the Victims of the Armenian Genocide is celebrated with great ceremonies in many communities of the diaspora on April 24-25, 1965. Commemoration ceremonies are held in Beirut, Aleppo, Damascus, Homs, Latakia, Kuwait, Cairo, Nicosia, New York, Boston, London, Paris, Marseille, Greece, in Athens in particular, Moscow and in South America. Everywhere, the Armenians raised the voice of protest against the denial by Turkish authorities of the mass extermination of Armenians and absence of even apology or restoration of justice. It can be stated that solemn commemoration of April 24, 1965 in numerous communities of Armenian diaspora displayed the qualitative transition from the culture of mourning ceremonies to another level of commemoration. In many countries, commemoration of April 24 for decades is accompanied by a march to Turkish embassies or consulates and demonstrations of protest, or sometimes burning the Turkish flag in front of them. Just several weeks ago, we received these posters from Argentina and Uruguay. See, posters used in 1965. and the right one, the red one, was used in Uruguay. Every year since 1968, on April 24, almost 1 million Armenians visit the memorial to the victims of the Armenian genocide. The Armenian leadership received permission from Moscow to officially visit the genocide memorial since 1975 only. That is 60 years after the genocide took place. To commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, for the first time in the Soviet Armenian reality, at 10 a.m. of April 24, 1975, the first secretary of the Central Committee of Communist Party of Armenia, Karen Demircan, laid wreaths and made a speech on TV. At 7 p.m., a moment of silence in the memory of the genocide victims was announced on the Armenian television and radio. So see how many people are visiting the memorial. I suppose this picture is from 2018, April 24. Yes, all these are people. In January 1985, Demircan applied to the Central Committee of Communist Party of Soviet Union with the request to proclaim 24th April a Remembrance Day of the genocide victims by the order of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the Armenian SSR, but the Politburo, the Moscow, refused. The second similar request was rejected in 1986. In September 1988, a similar request was sent by the new First Secretary of the Communist Party of Armenia, Suren Harutyun. This time the response was positive, as the Karabakh movement was gaining strength in Armenia while Moscow's influence was falling. On November 22, 1988, the Supreme Council of Armenian SSR adopted the law on, the title is, Condemnation of the Armenian Genocide of 1915 on Ottoman Turkey, and proclaimed April 24 the Remembrance Day of the victims of Armenian genocide. It is a non-working day since 1989. The proposal to recognize and to condemn the Armenian genocide of 1915, submitted to the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the USSR, remained unanswered. During the years of National Democratic Karabakh Movement, 1988-1990, the factor of Armenian genocide memory had become the engine that provided opportunity for the gradual, step-by-step changes of old perceptions and stereotypes, for the transformation of an identity based on outdated values, and for the formation of a new identity to make democratic reforms. That is, the factor that often interpreted as an obstacle to the elimination of the bondages of the past, and hence a hindrance to the real progress of Armenians, and the retrograde means, became the major incentive in Armenia's reality. A manifestation of this was that the image of a victim pleading for mercy and justice was replaced by that of a warrior who had realized that national objectives could be achieved through struggle only. This is a quote from my own book. In other words, the image of the victim in Armenia was overcome, which had led to the gaining independence and to success in the liberation of Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh in 1992-1994. Yes, just please read. So the wreath is reading, remaining in the empire is genocide itself. Or genocide will be prevented by the restoration of a national statehood, April 24, 1990. In 1965, on the 50th anniversary of Medjugorje, in the memory of genocide, a new quality was formed. It became all Armenian property, as well as a factor inside Armenianness, finally. Finally, the genocide memory became a constituent part of the Armenian identity, and through the efforts of Haidad and other similar organizations, chose the path of becoming recognizable to the world. On the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, the memory of the Armenian genocide remains, not Yeğer, but genocide, remains as one of the most important manifestations of the Armenian identity. This memory is one of the unique elements that unite different political forces in Armenia as well as in diaspora. Executive and legislative bodies of 30 countries as well as various international organizations have recognized the Armenian genocide. That memory became not only nation-keeping, but also nation-building factor. The official recognitions of the Armenian genocide, as a rule, take part on April 24 or on the days near to it. Their number could be even higher if the process of recognition was not influenced by global political issues. That is, the recognition issue is not in the scientific, but in the political plane. Thus, heads of various states regularly stress that facing the dark pages of its history would help Turkey to become a democratic society. Sometimes the factor of genocide is used by different states as a means of pressure on Turkey, and not for eliminating the consequences of genocide. Armenia is taking steps towards raising the question of genocide prevention on international level. The first and second global forums against the crime of genocide had been held in Yerevan on April 23, 2015 and 2016. Based on Armenia's proposal, the 28th session of United Nations Commission on Human Rights adopted the resolution of March 15, 2015 for the prevention of the crime of genocide. On September 11, 2015, the UN General Assembly adopted another resolution proclaiming a resolution suggested by Armenia, proclaiming December 9 International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and of the Prevention of this crime. A century after the genocide, on April 23, 2015, by the decisions of the bishops of the Armenian Apostolic Church, His Holiness Catholicos Garagin II and the Catholicos of the Great House of Cilicia Aram I issued a church regulation on the canonization of all innocent victims of the Armenian genocide, over 1.5 million people. It was declared that, I am quoting, from now on, the memory of our martyrs will be respected not by the Office for Dead and prayer for victims, but by a victorious hymnal to immaterial soldiers of victory, beatified through the blood of their martyrdom. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is a small present.
Yes, I know.
For something very important. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank
You did what you promised us, to focus on the ways,
Yes, on the ways.
on how the
process
the
was
process,
going on.
yes, was going on up to date, and we can think about the importance of the political issues, the power and the authority which is, has affect all of this process. that time, and also the importance of the diaspora.
Yes.
But
definitely.
also, I'd like to thank you specifically for the pictures from the museum and the whole structure of your presentation, which gave us also not only the frame, but also the sense of what has happened. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Υπάρχουν ερωτήσεις, σχόλια που θα θέλατε να θέσουμε? We have a question, or maybe a comment from Anastasia. Could we have the microphone and perhaps you have used this for
Yes,
the answers, but also
Yes.
would you prefer to have your audience?
It's somewhere there. Maybe you can translate me the question.
No, I will try in English.
Okay.
Okay, I have, it's a little storm of questions, but I will first like to ask if there is a feeling of division in the people of Armenia. My question is nowadays, what is the feeling in the society? Do you have a feeling of division among the people, that the people that believe that we should not speak for the past anymore, and the people that believe that this is very much buried from the state, and it should be come out, and there is a feeling of conflict in the society?
I understand. No, that feeling, it does not exist, not only among the Armenian people, but also in the Armenian leadership. That feeling does not exist.
Okay, I cannot, it is of course maybe because of lack of history that I have in my brain. It's very hard for me to understand the political continuation, the connections from these events to nowadays. And this happened twice when Dr. Hoffman described at some point that the residence of Kromny was destroyed in Pontos. And there were huge massacres there. And what happened in village Kromny in Ceres, in Greece, was the same in the Second World War with the Germans. And I cannot understand how this connection goes through the years. And also in your...
In case of Germans, they asked for excuse.
Yes, of course.
Yes, that is the main difference.
Of course, I ask for the political connections.
In our case, nobody asked for excuse. So if nobody is asking for excuse, whom we must excuse ourselves?
But why? Why refugees from there? Maybe this question was for Dr. Hoffman, but it came in my brain with your presentation. Okay, let's transfer it to your part. What I understood from your presentation is that after the massacres, Soviet took the chance to come to Armenia as a leadership of protection in the area. Is this true? Did I understand it right?
Well, that's a long story. Soviets, yes, they came to Armenia and established Soviet power in Armenia, but they were, the Bolsheviks helped the Turks with money and weapons for the war in September 1920.
Exactly.
So Bolshevik helps Turks to invade Armenia and to beat Armenians in that war. So later, several months later, in Moscow, they signed a treaty with Turks without participations of Armenians and giving the Nakhichevan region to a third country, that is to Azerbaijan. Soviets in 1921 decided to to leave to give Nagorno-Karabakh to the Azerbaijanis. And before that, they just in one day the decision was changed by Lenin and Stalin. So it seems that physically, yes, they helped Armenians, but in reality, we lost Kars region, Surmalu region, that both regions are by territory nearly the same as nowadays Armenia. We lost Nakhichevan and we lost Nagorno-Karabakh. So it is a gift from Soviets.
Exactly.
And up to day, we are trying to overcome that 100 years ago decisions.
And it looks like that the Soviet, I'm sorry. No, of course. Because, sorry.
Yes.
To continue the discussion at the end of...
Okay, I do not hesitate. Yeah.
So,
Yes, please, Vasilios has...
Professor, thank you. Actually, we have had a similar process of silence in Greece as well. Before World War II, it was actually imposed by the government because of the national division that could provoke the dire outcome of the military expedition in Asia Minor. So all the memories were virtually if not silenced, understated in Greece. The interesting thing, however, is that then it was NATO actually that prevented us from commemorating the Greek genocide. And the paradoxical thing is that Greece was very late in recognizing the genocide of its own people in Asia Minor. It only happened in the 1990s, and it happened after the end of the Cold War, when NATO was not longer so powerful and so important. So it is interesting to note that in the Armenian case, it was the Soviet regime that silenced the memory of the genocide. In the Greek case, it was first the government and then NATO. Of course, it was also important the memories you had in 1965, which we did not have. What you had in 1965, we had it many years later, at the end of the 80s. I just wanted to stress this, similarity when foreign powers and military organizations silence the memory of history. Thank you.
Yes, you are right. I think we both need to learn from our experiences, which were different. Yes, please.
I have my difficulties with the expression or even term innocent victims. I think that is a very misleading tautology. But typically it occurs not only in the context of the Ottoman genocide, but quite frequently in the context of genocidal cases. We really should stop with victims are victims. It is in the definition of victimhood that victims do not cause that they perish.
We in Armenia traditionally are using the term innocent victims, and that's normal for us. Okay, if you think that from a point of view of research there is no need, because Turks declares themselves also victims.
Yes,
but they are not innocent.
Yeah, that is the perversion which...
So in order to differ, that's why we are using the term innocent victims.
In denialism, the perversion occurs and victims are declared perpetrators and perpetrators are declared victims. We leave that aside. That is another issue. But there are no guilty victims.
Yeah. Okay. So, in any case, we can continue this very interesting discussion at the end of the day, according to our leader, Dimitris. This is the right thing for according to our program. So thank you very much.
Thank you also.
Thank you.